Aloha and welcome to Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute. Many of you know that the Grassroot Institute for about 15 years has sponsored a research and educational foundation in the Hawaiian Islands in which we take a look at issues such as the role of government and independent liberty and building the economy and so forth. We're very active in helping Hawaii to build a better economy, government, and society. But to do that, we also have to leave Hawaii and go to our nation's capital, where many decisions are made that impact us greatly in the Hawaiian Islands. Some of those issues deal with the Jones Act, a form of protectionism. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. They deal with whether or not Hawaii will have a federally recognized Indian tribe of Native Hawaiians, a race-based nation sponsored by the government. And we also have a good number of other issues that impinge upon our personal liberties and freedoms in Hawaii. That's why I'm so glad that recently we started a Washington, D.C. office. Grassroot Institute of Hawaii is the educational research foundation, but Grassroot Hawaii Action is our organization that goes door to door, reaching out to congressmen, senators, national organizations, providing education as well as helping to develop policies from Washington, D.C. that actually impact in a very positive way life in the Hawaiian Islands. I'm pleased today to have our executive director of our Washington work. We work closely together, both in D.C. and in the Hawaiian Islands. Please welcome to today's program, Andy Blom. Andy, aloha to you, Andy.
Aloha.
Aloha is something worth saying and appropriate no matter where you are on the planet.
Everywhere. We could use more of it every place, especially in Washington. We ought to export a whole lot of aloha
That's
to Washington.
Right. In D.C., you're the guy from Hawaii, and in Hawaii, you're the guy from Washington.
Yeah, it sort of makes me a man without a country in a way, but yes, they know me as the guy from Hawaii.
Well, it's been about 6 months since we launched our Washington office with you at the helm of that, and how are things going?
They're going very well. We are reaching out to Washington. By Washington, I mean, of course, the movement people, the political
That's
people,
right.
the delegates. So we're reaching out to Washington, and people are very welcoming. They're happy to have Grassroot Hawaii Action there. They're happy to the chairman of Grassroots says, close that 5,000-mile
That's
gap
right.
and learn more about Hawaii.
But if there's one thing I wish we could bring from Hawaii to Washington, D.C. during the sweltering summers, it's our cool trade winds.
That alone would make the city livable. It's just miserable in Washington in the summer, and there are no trade winds.
That's right. You know, as our viewers will know, the Grassroot Institute is active in trying to modify an old law here in the United States called the Jones Act. It was developed in the 1920s at a time when ship transportation of goods was important and linked to our national security. But things have changed in almost 100 years, and we're trying to update this Jones Act for the 20th century, and you're active in that.
Very much so. This is one of our
21st century.
21st
Excuse me,
century,
I was
yes.
almost behind the times over there.
And that's exactly it. We have what's almost a 19th century piece of legislation, and we need a 21st century Jones Act.
That's right.
And the Jones Act at the time, after the Second World War, was designed to see that America had a vibrant merchant marine in case of war, so we could ship goods and men. And
that's right.
The world's changed.
That's right. It has changed. And, you know, if we were to go back to the beginning of creation itself, and look ahead to the 20th century and had all the wisdom and knowledge on earth as well as foresight, hindsight, we probably wouldn't come up with a Jones Act. And there are many people who take that stand. But the reality is we have it. It's been in place for 100 years. And so we're looking for solutions that can move us forward in light of the fact that it's become part of the real structure of the way we practice cabotage or shipping in our nation.
This is exactly true. And look, the people of Hawaii pay a tremendous price for the Jones Act. There's all kinds of different pieces of information out there, but one of the kind of commonly assumed things is that the average family in Hawaii pays about $5,000 a year extra because of the Jones Act. The plain truth is, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, the United States was a maritime power. We were among the first or second most important maritime nations in the country. We are now almost invisible as a maritime power because of the Jones Act.
Well, there have been some dire effects of the Jones Act, and we're going to talk a little bit about it, but I want to address our viewers just for a moment. I don't want to go on too long if you're not familiar with this. The Jones Act comes from 1920. It's a maritime cabotage law, which basically means it governs the process of ships going from one U.S. port to another U.S. port. And it gives qualifications for those ships. And there are just basically 4 of those qualifications. Andy, you know this by heart. The very first one is the most significant qualification, and that's
everything shipped between 2 U.S. ports has to be on a U.S.-built ship.
Absolutely, and that is the one most people have focused on. That, number 1, anything under the Jones Act must be shipped on a ship that is built in the U.S. Number 2, it must be manned by a U.S. crew. Up to 75% has to be citizens of the United States. Number 3, it must fly the American flag. And number 4, it must be owned by an American company. Now, all of these rules add up to the fact that after almost 100 years, we have gone from being the largest, or nearly the largest, producer of cargo-bearing ships in the world to one of the smallest, because this has been a form of trying to protect our shipbuilding industry. How does protectionism work?
It's an economic disaster.
You're the father of 3 daughters, so
different kind of protectionism. That's, we keep the shotgun behind the door.
Did you ever
That's not a Jones
You ever
Act.
drive a Chevy? Did you ever own a Chevy?
You know what? I've owned a Chevy, but I've also allowed to buy a Toyota. And United Airlines flies Boeings, but they're also allowed to buy Airbuses.
Yeah, what happened to our automobile building capacity and industry when we protected it from foreign competition?
It got very sloppy, and it's the reason Detroit got so far behind the rest of the world, because they did not have to keep up. So our cars did not become more fuel efficient. They did not have as many new electronic improvements. They were not as inexpensive. And the rest of the world came in and stole big chunks of our auto market.
But we lifted most of our protectionism on the American auto industry.
And the benefit was the American consumer.
That's right.
And right now, Cadillac is really competing aggressively and successfully with BMW and Jaguar.
That's right.
Okay. And Chevy is competing very successfully with all of the Japanese cars. They were not competing when we had protectionism, and the consumer suffered.
That's right, absolutely. But imagine this. You don't have to imagine, because it's the case.
Yeah.
We have never lifted the protectionism on our shipbuilding industry from the inception of the Jones Act to the present day. And so now, as a result, we go from being the greatest shipbuilder on earth to one of the smallest. In fact, during the last year that it was measured, the United States built less than 1/2 of 1% of the tonnage of all new cargo ships in the world. Isn't that something?
And we are the leading economy in the world. Does this make any sense at all? No. So actually, our shipbuilding industry needs relief from this. They see it as protection, but they haven't had to compete, so they have become non-competitive. The same ship that they're taking 5 years to build and cost 5 times as much is being built in South Korea and Japan in 1/5 the time for 1/5 the cost.
That's right. And what we want our viewership to understand is that while there isn't enough detailed study on the exact economic costs of the Jones Act, there's no question about it that it does raise prices. There are many estimates that are up there that say in the state of Hawaii alone, anywhere between 5 to 30% surcharge goes on to our prices because of the Jones Act. And as soon as we get more research done, we'll know. But here's the bottom line. The Jones Act protectionism has produced a scarcity, a virtual scarcity of American ships. And yet we have a law that says we have to use these American ships when doing cargo transport between American ports. And this has resulted in 2 things: skyrocketing prices in some markets, and number 2, we have monopolies in certain markets, particularly in the Caribbean area or in the Hawaii trades and so forth. Now, I want to zoom ahead, Andy. very few people are actually doing something about this. I know that there are groups, and we're so grateful for our allies in Hawaii that are educating the public. But the Grassroot Institute and Grassroot Hawaii Action are the unique group that are active both in Hawaii and in Washington, D.C. to bring about a more rational Jones Act policy for the United States. Is that the case?
That is the case, and it is true. You mentioned, Guam is very interested in seeing this go away. Alaska, the governor of Alaska is actually required by law to try to end the Jones
That's right.
Act. Puerto Rico is suffering terrible economic problems, and they just had an independent economic study says Jones Act contributes significantly. General Accounting Office did a study in 2012 saying the Jones Act is going to cause dramatic economic problems for Puerto Rico. But we're waking up other people. North Carolina just built a massive warehouse to take feed in from South America because it costs them less to get their feed from South America than from Iowa and Kansas, and
That's right.
because of the cost of domestic shipping. Everybody, oil costs 3 times more to ship from Houston to Philadelphia than it does to ship from South America to Philadelphia. So everybody in America is impacted negatively by this.
You're absolutely right. When we could devote an entire program to the impact, and there are a couple of bright lights right now. We're a little bit in the dark in terms of giving the exact numbers, exactly how much does the Jones Act raise prices throughout the nation, but we're active in collaborating and bringing about research. I'm very pleased that our governor in the state of Hawaii, David Ige, has gone on record saying he would favor a study to quantify the effects of the Jones Act. And I commend him for that because I think the state of Hawaii needs to do that, and even at the federal level. But secondly, we're very pleased that a resolution in our legislature in Hawaii this past term for the study of ferries between the islands, that we didn't get the super ferry going. That resolution now has grassroots written language which incorporates study for the Jones Act and the cost benefit it would be to a ferry system. Anderson, I want you to give some broad strokes before the break on what Grassroot is doing in Washington, D.C. now. I know there's some legislation you're working on. I know there's some collaborations you're working on.
We will be getting Jones Act legislation introduced. We've worked with some influencers in Washington. We're working with a couple of senatorial and congressional offices. It may be part of some other piece of legislation, maybe standalone, but there are a lot of different things coming together to add momentum to this now. And with the current conservative leaning in our House and Senate, we have real interest to see that legislation gets introduced. So I'm very hopeful that this fall, might have to be this winter, but we are very close to Jones Act reform. And we're getting a lot of help from foreign countries who want this.
And when we come back from the break, I want to talk about that surprising turn in terms of foreign countries as an ally with us in terms of bringing about reform to the Jones Act. But part of getting the legislation out there has been your function of educating congressmen and women and senators, as well as many of their staff, on the details of the Jones Act, on the impact of the Jones Act, and on the fact that it actually affects all 50 states.
No, that's absolutely true, and it's astonishing. You go into a senator's office from North Carolina, and you're telling him about things that are happening in his state, and they're interested. They are,
very good.
The more that we get out there, the more that we spread this word, and we're working hard at this. We'll
talk about
in there digging out senators and letting them know what's going on.
We'll talk more about that after we take a short break. And when we come back, I'm going to ask Andy to share a little bit about what's happened in Europe and in Asia that is going to help us move toward Jones Act reform. This is Keli'i Akina on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. We'll be right back after this short break.
Aloha, my name is Jim Sean, and I'm host of a show called Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. Each week, live streaming at noon on ThinkTech Hawaii, we interview people who have special insights into education from early education through K-12, all the way through higher education and beyond. Both public and private are areas we're interested in. We dig deeper. We try to find out what it's really like to be involved in making change, advocating for it, how you reform, what people's philosophies are in reforming it. As I said, we're live streaming every Wednesday at noon on ThinkTech Hawaii. And later on, you can find these interviews on YouTube and on the Hawaii Educational Policy Center website. We hope you join us as many times as possible. Aloha.
And
Welcome back to Ehana Kako. We're here every week on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. ThinkTech Hawaii is a great organization that produces about 30 to 35 hours of original content, most of it originating in the Hawaiian Islands, near Bishop Street in downtown Honolulu. But ThinkTech Hawaii is global in perspective, and we see how the world sees Hawaii and how Hawaii sees the world and how we interact. A great group of people, Jay Fidel, the producer, all the team and the staff. You can find ThinkTech Hawaii on thinktechhawaii.com. And if you're Twittering right now, please give us a question or give us a comment at ThinkTech High. We do have a Twitter that's come in from Mark Ward. Thank you, Mark, for your tweet, and we look forward to tweets from other people. Mark asks, would the elimination of the Jones Act save money, but ultimately cost more in jobs and the final death of an American shipbuilding? Now, Mark, I'm going to pass this on to Andy in a second, but do want to say this. At Grassroot Institute, we're not going after the elimination of the Jones Act. That may ultimately happen in time. We're going after our very best to deal with the reality right now today, and that is, how can we modify this act that is entrenched so that we can have some immediate relief and then take it from there. But Andy, would modification of the Jones Act, particularly the requirement that our ships be built in the United States, opening up to our allies, actually result in a loss of jobs to American shipbuilding?
in all likelihood, no. First of all, it would force our shipyards to become more competitive, but there are only 6 major shipyards
right.
in the U.S., and 4 of them only build military ships.
That's right.
They're not going to lose a single job, okay? The other 2 also build military ships, so they're going to keep the jobs, but they would have to become more aggressive and more professional, just as Chevy did, just as
That's
Boeing
exactly
did.
right.
So, no, the answer is the competition will improve. And I
That's
really
right.
don't think it's fair for the very limited number of jobs we're talking about. And I don't think there will be any job loss. I don't think it's fair
Those
to
are very
ask-
good points that you're bringing up.
And it's not worth $5,000 to my family
Well,
and every other family in Hawaii.
absolutely. You're right that the number of jobs is so small already that it's not a significant impact,
No.
but they're not going to get lost. If we take a look at what's happened to Detroit, when we loosen up and have less government protectionism, you actually strengthen industries through
Over and over
competition,
again.
and you're going to see them grow. And I think that's an important point. And the other point is this: modifying the Jones Act doesn't take anything away from the dedicated building of military ships. We still have our aircraft carriers, still have our cruisers built exclusively in the United States, and the majority of the shipbuilding industry in Hawaii is really, I mean, in the United States.
Is military.
Is military. That's a good question.
And
Thanks.
we actually need to change that, and it won't change as long as the Jones Act is
Well,
there.
we need to become competitors globally in the commercial sphere, and this is where I'd like to go next. Everyone is aware of the fact that there's advocacy from Hawaii for modifying the Jones Act. Everyone's aware of the fact that there have been some voices in D.C. that have attempted to do that. But now we're hearing a chorus from across the world. There are some moving parts now that really kind of open a window of opportunity now that at Grassroot we're going to go right through in order to bring about some changes in the Jones Act.
Absolutely. We really are we're getting the first breezes of a perfect storm here. And that is, President Obama is very, very eager to have a series of trade deals be part of his legacy. And he told the 11 other nations participating in the Trans-Pacific Partnership that the Jones Act was off the table. All of those nations wanted Jones Act reform. but the European Union is just now getting their negotiations ready for the Atlantic Trade Act, and at the top of their list are getting rid of the shipbuild requirement and the international relay requirement of the Jones Act, and they're coming to the table aggressively. So we have, important international partners saying this has got to change.
That's right. And we have voices that are now coming from Asia and from Europe saying,
Yes.
we want our countries to be able to sell their ships. Our allies are asking us for this because that will be an economic boon to them. Now, in terms of the United States, that's not going to hurt us because we're suffering from a tremendous shortage of ships anyway and don't have the capacity to build them. And as we mentioned earlier, if there is a little bit of competition, we actually will grow our capacity. So, Andy, we've got something here that is actually bipartisan.
Oh, yes.
And in Washington, D.C., there aren't a lot of things that are genuinely bipartisan, but this one is, in fact, in such a way that it's actually confounding people. It's going to require a little bit of flexibility on the part of the thinking of some people in order to line up with a president who is promoting something that actually more Republicans favor than Democrats.
Well, this is true. These trade deals will not happen without, well, frankly, the Republicans are driving it in the legislature. And there is bipartisan support. They could not have passed the Trade Promotion Authority, the fast track to give the president the right to do these negotiations. They could not have passed that without bipartisan support. So this is a place where it may be the only place right now where Washington is coming together.
And this is quite interesting because an issue that was once hotly divided on partisan lines, the Jones Act, from its inception, you know how hard we have worked at Grassroot to bring bipartisan coalition together, and that we've done that at the local level in Hawaii in the state legislature. But an issue that has traditionally been has been partisan. I have to get that right. An issue that has traditionally been partisan is now likely to become bipartisan. We have a Democrat president. We have a Republican Congress that are in support of measures that would allow our allies to provide us their ships, and now we need Democrats to have some flexibility.
To be absolutely accurate, President does not want Jones Act reform, but the people negotiating do.
That's right. You're absolutely right. It's not the president driving this, but it is the president driving something that he wants very much, that would have the favor from our allies if a Jones Act reform provision could be included.
Yes, and in fact, obviously, negotiations can go through all kinds of things, but the Europeans are pretty aggressive about demanding some changes in it. So if he's going to get a North Atlantic trade agreement, and believe me, those other nations in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Pacific Rim trade, are not going to let the Europeans get away with having Jones Act exemptions unless they get them too.
Currently, as far as I know, our 4 delegates from Hawaii in the Senate and the Congress are not in favor of modifying the Jones Act. They may be at different degrees of that, but I don't know publicly that they have stated that they are in favor of that, which creates an interesting dilemma, but an opportunity for your work, because you are uniquely positioned, we are uniquely positioned in Grassroot Action to have the ear of the Republican majority, with whom we have many, many supporters, and the flexibility to go to Democrats in a way that our congressional delegation is not, to help them jump on board.
This is true, and Washington is as partisan as Hawaii is, but from Hawaii's perspective, the other team's in control up there. So it's, as I say, there's the makings of a perfect storm because we do have control of the legislature by a party that is philosophically and ideologically inclined to want Jones Act reform. And consequently, and we do have, Grassroot does have very good ties to these people, to the legislators, but also to staff members, to the influencers, to the organizations that help support these people. And we're getting a lot of positive support from other organizations up there.
That's right. And one last piece that Grassroot is able to bring together, because of my outreach in Asia and my prior work, especially with Singapore, Hong Kong, China, and because of your leadership in terms of looking for international partners from Hawaii, we're able to collaborate with international partners from Asia who are calling for Jones Act reform. And so I'm looking forward to the next update that we have on this, because we'll talk again at least before the next session of Congress or the opening up of the next seating, and we will see where we've gone with this.
Well, it will be exciting. As I said, it's the beginning of a perfect storm. It may happen quickly, it may take a little longer, but these different trade negotiations, along with our success in educating representatives from other states about the impact that it's having, is really building momentum for this. So I'm very hopeful.
There's another issue that in the state of Hawaii is taking center focus now, and that has to do with the place of Native Hawaiians and the greater population. And there are many voices that are speaking. There is no unanimous voice that speaks for everyone in agreement. But there are issues that we're facing, such as forms of activism. The shutdown of the road leading to the 30-meter telescope on Mauna Kea is in the eyes of everyone as a 2,500 delegate astronomy convention convenes in Hawaii. So how do we think through these issues, and what does Washington have to do with them? When we come back from a break, Andy and I are going to talk about an aspect of this that is being driven from the Washington, D.C. side, from the administration itself and the Department of Interior. And we'll talk a little bit about how Hawaii people feel about that. We have a moment, though, but right now, what is it that the Department of Interior is trying to accomplish in the state of Hawaii?
They're trying to form an Indian tribe, which we've never had an Indian tribe here, but what it amounts to is a massive federal land grab, which will result in gambling. It will result in a bunch of indigenous Hawaiians living as Indians on a reservation, which is a very odd situation. And it will involve the federal government taking control of the DHHL, the Department of Hawaiian Homelands.
Now, on purpose, you have given the perspective in this caricature of how it would be viewed from the Department of Interior, from Washington, D.C., an Indian tribe on a reservation and so forth. In reality, however, there are forces that are pushing this that really aren't looking to create a reservation, really aren't looking to create a tribe, but probably get all the goodies that happen when you have a tribe established by law. And that's really big business across the nation, the Department of Interior and the establishment of Indian tribes that have some kind of sovereign exemption on their land.
That's exactly what the government is after. And yes, it is a giant business. And it would have an enormous impact on our economy, and not necessarily a positive impact. But it would have an impact on every single person in this state.
As you've talked to congressional delegations, as you've talked with our allies across the nation, how generally do people perceive the expansion of Indian tribes across the nation?
Well, in the last 100 years...
And I mean federally recognized Indian tribes.
The federal government in the last, well, actually it's about 80 years, has gone from 47 recognized tribes to over 560 recognized tribes. They are making tribes all over the place, and it is becoming a very serious problem all across this country. And this is out of no disrespect. I have Native American blood. This is out of no disrespect for that. It's that it's not about those people. It's about a federal power and land grab. And it's one more incidence of federal overreach where we're being regulated into real serious problems.
Well, that's something. In addition to that, it is a divisive factor across our nation, and we're going to talk a little bit more when we focus in on how this is coming to Hawaii. Don't miss that. I'll be right back with Andy Blom after this short break on Ehana Kako on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Aloha.
Aloha, my name is Josh Green. I'm a senator from the Big Island. I work in the ER there. But on Tuesday afternoons, I get to come and spend 45 minutes to an hour with Jay Fidel and the ThinkTech staff. They're terrific professionals. They help us to bring some of the leading cutting-edge topics here across our state to you. So you can join us at our show on healthcare in Hawaii to talk with leaders from across all the spectrum of health in our state, or you can join us for any other show where we talk about economic development or tourism, or some really eclectic programs too. So really, we'd love to see you here on our show. Thanks for joining us and thanks for supporting us.
Hi, I'm your host on ThinkTech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, ThinkTech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia. And by Asia, we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world, and we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Welcome back to the final segment of today's E Hana Kako on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. You've heard that saying said all over Hawaii. If you've been in the beautiful Hawaiian Islands, when people stop to pray for a meal or when there's a gathering of government officials, it's often said E Hana Kako, E Pule Kako, which is let's pray together. Well, at the Grassroot Institute, we say E Hana Kako, which means let's work together. Because we don't like the alternative, where we're not working together. Instead, we would like to unite Hawaii's people to work for a better government, economy, and society. Andy Blom and I have been talking about the work of Grassroot Action in Washington, D.C. as we are one organization, Grassroot, trying to improve the economy, government, and society in Hawaii. And right now, we're going to go right back into our conversation. That was very insightful, Andy, talking about some of the real problems of the spread of Indian tribalism. No disrespect to Native American tribes that are authentic, but the government's hand in it has created a massive land grab.
Exactly.
It has created the opportunity for fraud and abuse in terms of businesses in the gambling industry, financial industry, and so forth. And land and zoning have become a real problem in a lot of the states where the tribes recognized by the federal government can operate under different zoning laws, in fact, no zoning laws whatsoever, whereas their competitors across the freeway or their competitors or just their neighbors have to live by certain regulations. So all of this,
it's a big problem.
And all of this is what people want to bring to Hawaii.
It's what the federal government wants to bring
See,
to Hawaii.
and I'm glad you said that, because from a Hawaii point of view, we're looking at one aspect of the issues, which happens to be the self-determinism of Native Hawaiian people and the social relationship with the rest of society, as well as rights and so forth, from that angle. But from the federal government point of view, we're looking at an administration that wants to increase its power, its ability to grab land and control. And this is something that would come in the form of federally recognizing an entity and calling it a Native Hawaiian tribe. But there's a problem, isn't there?
There's quite a few. The first is that means the federal government takes over the Department of Hawaiian Homelands and all the Hawaiian homelands, which is in violation of the treaties that were signed that let Hawaii become a state and that allowed for these lands to be for the people of Hawaii. And when they do this, you described some of the instances. You talked about zoning, but what happens when the federal government recognizes a tribe and they take a bunch of land is, it's not just zoning. There's no minimum wage. There's no tax, no similar tax breaks. There's no OSHA. So people operating businesses across the street from people on state land are playing a completely different set of roles. That's right. And then there's gambling. And if you visit reservations, as I have done, you will see most people living on reservations are not living well. Few chiefs are living very, very well, and the rest of the people aren't. And the money that comes in from the casinos goes to buy more land, and they just expand and expand.
You see, there's this disconnect here. Many people think that federal recognition of Native Hawaiians is going to be a benefit to Native Hawaiians and is going to be something that is harmless to the rest of society, but that's simply not the case.
It's going to be a benefit like being recognized by the DMV is, okay? It's just not going to be a favor to Native Hawaiians.
Now, as it turns out, there's a lot of opposition from Native Hawaiians to this process, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, but let's go back to something you mentioned. You actually mentioned two prongs. One, we were talking about Native Hawaiian federal recognition as an Indian tribe.
Right.
And that has been what the Akaka bill has pursued, and that's what's being pursued by the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and the Native Hawaiian Roll Commission in Hawaii. But you also mentioned the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, which manages the trust lands for Native Hawaiians that we call the homesteading lands,
Right.
and so forth, and that the federal government is now involved in trying to increase its own control and management of that. They've recently issued or been looking at issuing some new rules on this as well.
Yes, which are frankly outrageous. They bury these rules. This is a regulatory practice we're seeing with the National Geographic and Atmospheric Administration, with the EPA. These regulatory agencies are becoming a fourth arm of government where they issue rules and they bury things in there, and then they use giant penalties and fines to punish people. But we don't have a problem with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, except that it's not providing Hawaiians with
Sure.
homelands fast enough. There's no reason for the federal government to come in and seize that land.
And this is one of the reasons that we as the Grassroot Institute and Grassroot Action are involved. We see the opportunity here, sad opportunity, and we want to fight against it, of misleading and exploiting Native Hawaiians.
That's
I'm
exactly right.
part Native Hawaiian. I went to the Kamehameha schools, and there I learned to be very sympathetic to this movement by some of our congressmen to have Hawaiians recognized as a federally recognized Indian tribe. But nobody told me at that time what I have learned through study and research very clearly, which was obvious. We Hawaiians never were a tribe
Exactly.
based on race.
Exactly.
From the time of King Kamehameha I, the forming of the Hawaiian kingdom, until Queen Liliuokalani, Hawaiian citizens were Native Hawaiians, Chinese, Japanese, Caucasian, and so forth. So the idea that we are a tribe based on race is simply myth. And maybe this is why there is such difficulty today to form the tribe, or the Native Hawaiian roll, which is trying to do that.
That's a very large part of it, and we say Washington is trying to do this. Congress has refused to do this and refused to do this forever
That's
and
right.
ever and ever. And the Department of Interior is trying to go around Congress to create this Indian tribe because Congress recognizes there never was a race-based tribe here. Hawaii started with all men are of one blood, and one of the terrible things that happens out of this is that we're getting more racial disunity here because the federal government is trying to divide us by race. So that aloha spirit that I have in my family, people literally of every ethnicity you can imagine. My daughters can't fill out a form because there's so many, but now they're being diced by the federal government when they never would.
That's
They'd
right.
have never been diced by the Kingdom of Hawaii.
That's right. You know, and it's a very simple question to answer. What do the Hawaiian people really want? Do they want the federal government coming to Hawaii, managing the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, establishing Hawaiians as a federally managed Indian tribe? Do they want the federal government involved in that? What have all the hearings shown when Native
over
Hawaiians
and over
have come
again,
out
they stand up and say
testified?
no and no and no and
Ole.
no. Sorry, okay,
Ole.
I bow to you, yes. And the administrator of the Department of Hawaiian Homeland said no.
I was asked once, has there been a survey of Native Hawaiians to tell whether or not they want to have this option of being a federally recognized Indian tribe and even being on a tribe? And the answer is absolutely yes. More money has been spent on this survey than any other public survey or public affairs survey in the entire state.
Wow.
And that survey is called the Native Hawaiian Roll. Our legislature authorized the Office of Hawaiian Affairs to set up the Native Hawaiian Roll Commission for the purpose of enrolling a tribe
Right.
by computer.
Right.
In other words, it is so obvious there is no Hawaiian tribe.
Yes.
You had to go out there, do a
Couldn't just have them all come down to the tribal headquarters, could they?
Right. You had to do a marketing campaign, spend millions of dollars, almost $10 million, over a 3-year period of time to sign people up. And that survey targeted over 500,000 Native Hawaiians across the United States in the 50 states. And their goal, as in their own information, was to recruit 250,000. After millions of dollars and a couple of years, do you know what percentage of that 500,000 got enrolled?
Millions of dollars they must
Yeah.
have gotten.
Less than 5%. 95% of all eligible Native Hawaiians in the United States, after this expenditure, after this effort, declined to participate. And this was incredible. I mean, that's well below the voter turnout.
Well, coincidentally, isn't that just about the same percentage of Native Hawaiians who voted for statehood in 1959?
You are right. There's no direct correlation of those numbers, but other than the fact that the majority of Native Hawaiians, if you take the only objective measures, such as those who voted for statehood in 1959, those who on the Native Hawaiian roll declined to participate, the majority, just to be generous, the majority are not interested in doing that at all. And this is something that flies in the face of what Washington is trying to do. What position has the Obama administration taken on this?
Well, President Obama said he's going to create an Indian tribe. So, you know, this is the promise he's made. As a resident of Hawaii, as someone who spent his youth here, some of his youth here, do not understand why he wants to cause all of this problems for our state. And I do not believe he could love our state and want to do this, because it is such a divisive thing. The Native Hawaiian people don't want it. The Department of Hawaiian Homelands don't want it. Every time there's ever been a hearing out here, the overwhelming number of people who take their time to come out and testify don't want it. Why are they trying to do this to us?
That's right. You know,
except for power and money for the federal government.
There are voices that are, as we say in Hawaii, akamai, that are smart, that see what's going on. We've reached out to a good number of them in D.C. One is the Commission on Civil Rights
Commission, yeah.
And,
Human Rights Commission, sorry.
Or the Civil Rights Commission.
Okay.
About a year and a half ago, they issued a letter, 4 of the members, or 5 of the members issued a letter in which they addressed the question of whether or not Hawaiians should be tribalized, pointing out the problems with that, and spelling out very clearly what the criteria for being a tribe was. And the 2 top criteria, number 1, race-based citizenship based on race, and number 2, a continuing form of governance. So here's the problem. Native Hawaiians, we are so much part and parcel of all of Hawaii.
Yes.
Number 1, historically we know, we never had a nation based on race. And number 2, there is no continuing form of governance to deal with. There are at least 8 Native Hawaiian kingdoms being for that position, tiny little groups of people who have their own king and so forth. But that doesn't constitute in any way a continuing form of government.
But I have some friends in these kingdoms, and they don't want to be Indian tribes. You know, they may believe passionately in a sovereign, independent nation of Hawaii,
That's right.
but they do not believe that they should be farmed onto a reservation.
In fact, we do have allies who've gone to Washington, D.C. with us, trying to tell, who are Native Hawaiian activists, saying, we don't want the federal government to do this. Well, Andy, this has been a great opportunity to catch up.
Great to talk with you.
We're going to let our viewers know more as the months and years go on. Thank you for your great work in Washington, D.C.
It's an honor to serve Hawaii.
This is Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute. My colleague today and every day is Andy Blom, executive director of Grassroot Action Hawaii. We're one big movement together working for a better Hawaii, a better government society, a better economy. And you're watching this all on ThinkTech Hawaii's E Hana Kako. We'll be right back next week. Aloha.